Hey, Charlie Sauer here with the Market Institute Foundation and editor of U.S. Policy. Today, we're talking to the guy who wants to put a stop to Uncle Sam driving the getaway car for healthcare price gougers. All right, we're here with Dr. Keith Smith. He's the co-founder of the Surgery Center of Oklahoma. He's the co-founder of the Free Market Medical Association, and he's one of my personal heroes. And what's interesting to me about Dr. Keith Smith is his accomplishments, but it's also that when we're talking to Keith, he's soft-spoken. But when I think about what he's done in healthcare, it's so aggressive and so booming that it sometimes takes me aback when I hear his soft-spoken nature, because he's really a disruptor in the market. And so, Keith, thanks for coming today.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited for your podcast. This is fun.
I hope it's fun. And what I really want to talk about today with you is who you are, but also what led up to who you are today. So I don't know, maybe we can start at kind of the beginning. I don't know. I think in your case, the beginning might be in medical school, but where do you consider kind of the beginning of your journey? And can you take us through kind of the early days?
Yeah, to keep it fairly concise, the beginning is probably when I was just beginning in private practice, having labored as a resident and a fellow under the impression that I could start private practice as an anesthesiologist at a hospital and anesthetize patients for cardiac surgery or pediatric surgery and be paid a fair price, be involved in a mutually beneficial exchange. And that all changed. My eyes were open not long after I started practice when the resource-based relative value scale was inflicted on all of the physicians who dealt with Medicare. There were a group of people at Harvard that thought they were smart enough to attach a price to every physician service that was providable. And the initial attachment of this prices was on physicians like myself, hospital-based doctors who couldn't do anything about it, and that was intentional. It's no coincidence, I think, that radiologists, anesthesiologists, pathologists, and ER docs were the first to be truly victimized by this assigned pricing. And
what were those prices before they put on that scale, and what were the prices afterwards for?
Yeah, so to give you an example, when I started practice in 1990, typical Medicare beneficiary receiving cardiac anesthesia from me would render a payment to me of about $1,100 for the anesthesia part of that service, which could be, 2 hours, could be 5 hours. Some of those cases are difficult, some are not. After round one of RVRVS, which I'll remind everyone happened under a Republican president, that fee went to $550, almost exactly in half. And then not satisfied, they went to round two. And the last payment I received for a 6-hour revision cardiac surgery was $285. The last payment I received from Medicare at all was a $78 check for anesthesia services I provided for a knee replacement. And I decided then that I just wasn't going to participate in the scheme anymore. So I provided anesthesia services to Medicare beneficiaries free of charge from then on and didn't file any claims. I fortunately had been exposed to some economics, and so I was able to kind of follow the crumbs along the ground and to discover ultimately what I think represents a foundation for my economic thoughts these days. But But I realized this pricing imposed on physicians by the Medicare goons was not personal. These were just signals that were being sent into this dysfunctional market, and I felt obligated to respond with a rational signal of my own. So I just quit. But it got me thinking about prices, and my journey continues on discovering what are prices, where do they come from, what do they mean. It's not a simple topic at all. And here I am telling an economist, but I'm confessing my ignorance. But I remain a student. But I thought about prices a lot ever since, and what do they mean? Are they a signal in the marketplace? And when I realized that simultaneously physicians being brutalized by this imposed Medicare pricing, the hospitals were getting rich. The hospitals worked hard to create a propaganda machine that sent out this message that they were all going broke. And that machine is still very operational today. All the hospitals are on the verge of bankruptcy unless they get more money from X, Y, and Z. We still hear that every day. The emergency room is what's bankrupting them, and there's a crane in front of everyone building on. So none of it makes sense now. Looking back, it did not make sense then. But I just had to secede. I had to get out. Patients were being bankrupted by hospitals where I worked, and I was an accomplice, and so I had to walk away.
So you were at the hospital, and is there a case that broke your back? Is there something that finally, like, the switch went? Well, I'll just in there. Is there a switch that went?
The switch that went was the availability of a way to punch out. I mean, I was grappling for my ejector seat starting at about 1993, but could not figure out a way to get it done. I tried to corral a group of surgeons to actually build from ground up a surgery center on multiple occasions. That was like herding cats. And that was very, very difficult. What happened was the Surgery Center of Oklahoma was actually already in operation and was about to fail, mismanaged by a big corporation. And Steve Lonte and I actually bought the Surgery Center of Oklahoma on a hunting trip. So we were actually able to acquire a facility for a reasonable price. And so that was the switch that, here is our chance. We can jump. And the water is not that cold, and we've got 10 surgeons who we think will come with us. We weren't sure. And just knowing that we weren't likely to drown when we jumped right then, that's what happened. But we were trying to get out.
Yeah.
This is from 1993, and it took about 4 years. In 1997 is when we gained control of this facility and transformed it.
So right when you gained control of the facility, is there something you did different right away? Is just the fact that you were at a surgery center, did that make things different? Was it just the fact that you were in control? What did that first surgery center where you were the boss, what did that look like differently than what the hospitals were doing?
Well, I didn't realize it at the time, but my friend Jack Brown from Oregon has pointed out that this move in the business world is called disintermediation. So because we were completely physician-owned and controlled, we had disintermediated the system. We had eliminated from the equation the greediest profit seeker out there, and that's the not-for-profit hospital. So we really didn't need for the facility to make a big profit. We could actually operate the surgery center as a true not-for-profit entity. As physicians, we just wanted to be paid fairly. So our mission from the get-go was never to do business with the government, because we learned they were not trustworthy, and in fact were deliberately deceitful. And we also wanted patients to know how much they were going to pay, and we wanted them to know that up front. We filed insurance claims at the time, and found that what we were quoting patients for an all-in cash out the door price was less than their deductible and copay at an in-network hospital. And that's how we launched. That's how we launched the facility, and were very successful early.
When you talk about the government being greedy and deceitful, I think as libertarians, objectivists, economists, skeptics, we look at government and we see that. But when you're practicing medicine, what does that look like as a doctor? What does that look like as a business owner?
Well, as a physician, I mean, you can imagine, you know, I'd gone through medical school, anesthesia residency, did a cardiac and a pediatric fellowship. Came to Oklahoma City thinking I, could make a living doing cardiac anesthesia, when all the rules changed. Lucy pulled the football back, and I didn't realize until much later that government had a history of being loosey with the football, and that many physicians, old timers at the Association of American Physicians and Surgeons in particular, they thought this was predictable. They saw this coming, and so it was news to me, and so that's what it kind of looked like. The government also deserves to be thumped every chance anybody can thump them, because many times the media focus is on the big bad insurance companies, the big bad big pharma. But everybody needs to realize, in the big bad hospitals, that everybody needs to remember and realize that Uncle Sam is driving the getaway car for these thieves. None of these schemes are possible without legislative maneuvering to allow these schemes. And so the government, ultimately, the federal government in particular, is really who we ought to be keeping our focus on, because all they do is auction. They auction these favors to people who are willing to pay. And Medicare still pays multiples for any physician or facility service that an ambulatory surgery center provides, I would argue, at a higher quality. Medicare pays, facility fees to physician offices if the physicians are employed. So it's very, very gross.
All right. So you were at the hospital, you make the jump, you start the surgery. Well, you take over the Surgery Center of Oklahoma. You're already charging less. You're making the same amount of money or more. You're charging less for patients, but then you did something else, and you did something else that really set out a changing of the world, and or we're on track to change the world. And that was posting your prices. What drove that decision? And can you talk about then what happened after that?
Yeah, so we were filing claims out of network. No insurance companies would work with us then or now. That's another story. But multiple legislative attempts were made to put us out of business, by the hospitals and by the insurance companies. The insurance companies finally stumbled on a method that was very effective and devastating, where they stacked deductibles. So patients had to meet their in-network deductible and then go meet their out-of-network deductibles separately. So they were stacking deductibles, and patients we were taking care of could no longer afford to come see us. So by that time, our reputation in the community was well established, very high quality. We took care of all the Division I athletes in the state, with a few exceptions. We were, pediatric trained anesthesiologists, so we'd anesthetize the children of the who's who in town. We had a great reputation. So we were arguably better. We were definitely cheaper. And in a market economy, you ought to have a line out the door if you're better and cheaper. And our waiting room was suddenly emptied with this deductible stacking move. So I thought, I need to find out what people are paying for tonsillectomies and gallbladders, and then beat it. And then I realized, no, I mean, we have a price list we've been quoting to uninsured patients over the phone. I need to just tell all of these self-funded buyers, for instance, what we will do it for. And then I realized I had told a friend of mine who operated a gold and silver shop that he should put his prices online, and kind of thumped myself on the head. And so, well, that's what we should do. So we launched a website 12 years ago in April, put the prices online, all inclusive prices, and these Canadians started to show up, which was very interesting. They were the first ones to take advantage of our pricing, which was informative then as it is now. They all have coverage, they just don't have access to the care many of them require. And then the self-funded company showed up. Jay Kempton was the first. And true to form, Jay did not keep us a secret. He told all of his competitors about us. And I introduced Jay to my competitors. And so things started to happen. And these price gouging hospitals suddenly found themselves in a market. Even hospitals far from here who saw people who lived in their community jump on a plane and fly to Oklahoma to have their surgery. So, the certificate of need laws began to lose their bite as patients demonstrated their willingness to travel. And these hospitals realized they were in a market. A market had been created. It just appeared with the posting of these prices. And so hospitals realize I can match that surgery center price or lose this patient. And that's a market, I think, depending on what definition you want to use. And then people all over the country began to copy us, some because they were losing business to us, some because they realized it was the right thing to do. Some copied us in kind of a sneaky way where it looked like they were copying us, but they really weren't. I'll throw University of California, Los Angeles under the bus. If you search UCLA cash pricing, you'll encounter a website that looks very similar to mine, because it's exactly my website. And everyone else has asked if they can copy our website, and I say yes. They didn't ask; they just did it. I thought that was funny. So yeah, this free market movement was born in just that way, and it's a testament really to the power and the beauty of these ideas. It's everybody knows when they're being ripped off, and everybody likes a mutually beneficial exchange. No one likes to be ripped off.
Honestly, I think that we can almost come back and revisit this conversation over and over again because of how many little stories went on in there. Like when you first came and visited DC to walk around Capitol Hill with me, I remember you flying with a paper where the hospital had listed all of their prices. And I think about a third of them matched your prices, but they all had asterisks next to them where it wasn't all inclusive and it could still go higher. And so there's little stories that I think we need to come back and revisit in this. But I want to finish with this. You've done a lot. You've talked about this kind of moving nationally. I don't know if you have these numbers off the top of your head, but can you talk about the growth that we're seeing and how fast do you think the free market is going to take over? I think that we're still at the beginning stages, but I think it's starting to pick up speed.
Yeah, I think we're at a tipping point, and these executive orders out of the administration have really changed the narrative. I told somebody the other day that 12 years ago, I was adorned with a tinfoil hat for having put our prices online. And now, fast forward 12 years, and I would argue that ideas like this typically take much longer to sink their fangs in. 12 years later, now price gouging hospitals, are forced with the choice of posting prices or pay fines. So it's a real 180. The narrative has changed. The growth of the movement is hard to measure I know what we're seeing, and those are the people who are, out in the open doing this. But keep in mind, the growth of this movement is far larger because there are many people who remain cloaked, who are trying to have it both ways, who are matching the Free Market Surgery Center in Austin, Texas. They're matching their price, or they're matching Bill Grant's price in Charlottesville, Virginia, or any number, Richard Kuby's price in Illinois. They're having to match these prices or lose this business, but they're in the closet. So they're actually market participants now against their will, but there's no way really to measure, I think, how large this movement has become, because so many want to still keep it secret so they can have it both ways. But it's become a giant enough movement. Price transparency is a real key phrase now that even politicians feel comfortable with. What we have to guard against is making sure that the definition of these terms and phrases is not changed by those who do not benefit from a market approach in this industry. And I would argue some of that's already kind of going on, but that hopefully will not, they won't get away with that.
Well, I want to thank you for sharing your story with us today. And I want to thank you for everything you've done for the free market. I look forward to seeing what you do next week, next month, and realistically see how the market changes over the next decade. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlie.